Joining me now is Spike Cohen. Spike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Spike, so you guys at You Are the Power, you've been researching a lot of these really shocking cases of potential CPS overreach. The brunt of it is in many of these cases it involves, this might come as a surprise to viewers out there who have a lot of trust for the medical establishment, but the medical establishment has essentially been looking at cases where honestly diseases could be involved and instead sending these cases off to CPS. So really sick kids are being pulled away from the arms of their parents at moments that are otherwise crisis moments where they should be there. Talk to us a little bit about some of the cases that you've been tracking.
Yeah, so this ultimately amounts to what after hearing the case, I think most of you will conclude the same as me, that this is basically child trafficking. The first case we heard about was the Hernandez family. Matt and Tucky Hernandez have two children, Aria and Emma. Emma is their youngest, and shortly after she was born, she had a rash and some swelling, and she was crying. And so they took her to Children's Hospital of Atlanta, where it was determined that she had some breaking that was consistent with either fractures that were consistent with either osteogenesis imperfecta or neonatal rickets. As a result of that, Dr. Stephen Messner, the child abuse physician, decided to call it abuse instead, and both of their children were seized, and Matt and Tucky ever since then have not been allowed to speak with one another or live with one another, and have only been allowed to see their children a handful of times. There have been multiple instances in this case where they had to fight to get the medical records and then have it looked at by medical professionals. Those medical professionals were not allowed to testify in their hearing, and instead the judge would only allow the child abuse physician who showed up and said, yeah, statistically, these tend to be abuse, and you can look that up on the internet if you'd like. And the reason that they do this, and there are other families we're working with as well, the reason that they do this is because under Title IV of the Social Security Act, every time they call a case abuse, they get additional money. Their agencies get additional money, the family court gets additional money, and everyone involved all the way down the pipeline, from the child abuse physician to the caseworker to the investigating officer to the judge and everything in between, the foster families and everything else, they all get additional federal money. And so they are incentivized to essentially traffic these children.
It's really awful, and it's not surprising to me at all that at the end of the day, money is the source of it. So to hear that's at the root of what was happening here is very disturbing, especially when we hear a lot of cases about CPS not getting involved in the cases that we should think that they would, right? For a lot of people at home, I'm sure, like myself, back before I started noticing things like this, you think Child Protective Services, and you think about, the quiet kid who shows up to class with bruises under his shirt, and the teacher notices, and they get involved and send the kid off to some Hallmark family with a golden retriever, and everything's good at the end of the day. But the reality is, more and more often, we hear about those cases where reports are taken, and yet certainly people are paid to make the reports, but the kids are left and often die miserably. I mean, we just had the case with that YouTube mom, so this isn't to say that CPS shouldn't exist or that kids shouldn't be protected, but the reality is that this seems to be a system, like many bureaucracies, many taxpayer-funded bureaucracies, that's incentivized not by fixing a problem, but by perpetuating it. So it's very disturbing that we see that many parents who are trying to do the right thing, these aren't just kids who are in trouble now. These are parents trying to do the right thing are being caught up very fast. And these are things that happen very fast and are completely out of control of the parents. As you mentioned, this is a situation where the parents, the only thing that they could do to try to regain custody of their children is comply with orders that are insane and psychotic. Like, you can't live with your spouse any longer. You can't talk with your child who needs hospitalization for a degenerative disease. It's absolute insanity. So talk to us a little more. This isn't just one isolated case. You brought up the Hernandez family. This is multiple cases, and it seems like a lot of them have been centered around Georgia. Talk to us a little more about what else is going on.
Yeah, it's not an isolated case, and it's also not isolated to Georgia. What has happened is that, as we discovered the Hernandez family, many more families have come forward in Georgia to tell their stories as well, and to try to get help from us. But we're also finding other families in other states as well. And to be clear, this started as a federal problem under Title IV of the Social Security Act. As soon as the federal money federal government started throwing monopoly money at this problem, it immediately became an incentivization to call as many cases as they possibly could abuse. So two other families in Georgia that we know of, and we're currently vetting many other cases as well, are the Sullivan family and the Timms family. Very, very similar situations. Both of them, turns out that one of their children has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which causes fractures. They took them to a children's hospital. A child abuse physician with a long history of false accusations against parents, innocent parents, called it abuse. The children were immediately seized. The judge does not allow evidence of actual. They only allow the child abuse physician's testimony. They do not allow expert evidence, expert testimony from the parent side saying that this is not abuse, that there's no evidence of abuse. And then what's interesting about all of this is that all of these parents have looming court cases, looming criminal cases against them that are basically on hold indefinitely. And in some cases, they haven't even been formally charged. And the reason's very clear. If they actually went forward with a trial, it would become very apparent that not only was there no evidence of abuse, but that there was evidence of abuse by these government officials. And so instead, they just leave those cases pending so that the family courts can just destroy these families, order non-reunification, place them for adoption. And the problem is what happens is when they see a kid with a chronic health condition, instead of saying, oh, this clearly is an abuse, or there's not really any reason to think this is abuse, instead they go, wow, this kid has a child that has a chronic health condition. We get even more money for that. And that's the problem, is they're being incentivized to do it this way. And what they've done is over the past few decades, they've basically created a system, and this is in pretty much all 50 states. It's an administrative tribunal. It is operating outside of the Constitution, outside of everyone's constitutional right to have a trial by jury, to be able to face their accusers. There is no real, there's a very arbitrary standard of evidence. The judge can decide arbitrarily what is or is not evidence. Frankly, they're not even really operating as judges. They're operating in concert with Child Protective Services to be both the investigator, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. If we went back to simply treating child abuse and child neglect the same way we treat every other crime, where there is a investigation, it goes before a judge, the accused has an opportunity in trial to actually prove their innocence, but that they are assumed to be innocent before proven guilty. In that situation, you'd see a lot less abuse, and you would see a system that would be focused on targeting actual abusers instead of just getting as many children in the system as they can to get as much money as they can.
Spike, talk to us a little bit about what's being done to address this problem, what you and your team are hoping to do to fix this.
So what we're doing right now is we are hyper-focusing on Governor Brian Kemp and the Georgia legislature. We want them to make these serious reforms to the system that can then act as a blueprint for a domino effect across to the other 49 states to end this abuse and to end this nightmare that countless thousands or even tens of thousands of innocent families are experiencing, where their children are being taken from them for literally no good reason. And so if you want to help be a part of that, if you go to youarethepower.net/GA, it has all of the contact information in there. We are trying to get as many people as possible to call for Governor Brian Kemp to meet with us and with the families that are being torn apart by his Division of Family and Children's Services, and to actually sit down and talk about the constitutional protections that should have always been in place but need to be put in place to protect parents and to protect these children and to protect their rights and to stop this abuse from happening. So if you go to youarethepower.net/GA, and if you also join us on social media in calling for Brian Kemp to meet with You Are the Power and with the innocent families being torn apart in Georgia, then that would help as well. But it all starts by going to youarethepower.net/GA.
So obviously we're in a really special time in politics here in the United States, where states' rights, for a long time, it seemed like it was kind of nobody really pushed the issue of states' rights. Now we're seeing this tested in a lot of ways in immigration and abortion. Is this an area where, because this is a federal system, is there going to be a lot that Kemp and the Georgia legislature are going to be able to do to address this? What legislatively can they do to take this issue on?
Oh, this is entirely something that can be handled at the state level. It is being incentivized to be done the wrong way by the federal government. I know that's a huge shock to everyone listening to this, but the solution can happen at the state level. And the main thing is that is that child abuse and child neglect needs to be treated as a criminal issue, as it always has. CPS or DFCS or DCFY, there's a bunch of different names for it in each state. In South Carolina, it's called DSS. But Child Protective Services needs to act only as an advocate for the child. They should not be investigating. They should not be making recommendations of punishment. There needs to be the court that is handling this needs to be handled just like every other court. They need to be allowing for us to face our accusers. I say us, the families to face their accusers. They need to be allowing for the doctrine of innocent until proven guilty. They need to be treated the same way any other criminal court would be treated. There are many granular changes that need to be made, but they all boil down to that. Once that happens, and the practice of paying the individual workers basically a bonus from that federal money for calling it abuse, that needs to end completely. The workers need to be paid based on doing their job, not based on getting a specific preferred outcome, which just happens to be taking children from as many parents as possible, whether or not they did anything wrong. So the change, the solution is absolutely at the state level.
This is an absolutely insane story. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this, Spike. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.